This is perhaps the second time since 1947 that India has found itself in a situation of crossroads, where the wrong turn can land us in the soup, and the right turn, the correct turn, can catapult us to a great nation, developed nation. So it requires a great deal of leadership skill and a savvy public to see that we may do the right thing. In 1977, when we really had the first major crossroads, the question was whether India should opt for democracy or like many other countries which were presented to us as models, like Singapore, like China, others, adopt a dictatorship and make progress to a dictatorship. For a variety of reasons, Mrs. Indira Gandhi at that time decided to impose a state of emergency and justified it, although the real reason she declared a state of emergency was that one of the high courts of India, the Allahabad High Court, had found her guilty of corrupt practices in her election and unseated her. And therefore, rather than vacate the seat and fight the matter in the court, she decided to declare a state of emergency where a large number of people without trial put in jail, 140,000 to be exact. At that stage, there was a lot of agonizing whether India should have a democracy in the first place. And most international observers, including people in this country, were of the view that India, being a third world country, with a very large number of poor people, India should not, the people wouldn't want democracy, they wanted food in their stomach. And this was being propagated as a kind of justification for what Mrs. Gandhi had done, essentially suspending the fundamental rights of the Constitution and the democratic process. But the people are not reconciled, although it was not known at that time that people are not reconciled. We came to know that much later. And one day Mrs. Gandhi decided that since there was no apparent protest against her dictatorial rule, that she would get the stamp of approval of an election for continuing with dictatorship. And an election was called. When it was called, it was widely thought that Mrs. Gandhi would win it hands down because the opposition was mostly in jail and they were in disarray. But we found that exactly the opposite happened. Not only the opposition coalition, which merged into a single party called Janata Party, won, but Mrs. Gandhi herself lost her own seat, which could never have been predicted, was not predicted, and is an extraordinary event. And since then, the question of whether we should have democracy or not has never been an issue in India, because the decision was made at that moment at crossroads. Actually, if you look at the world over, you do find that if you really study this seriously, it's the democracies which have made progress and not dictatorships. A near laboratory type experiment was conducted when World War II, Germany was completely destroyed and then partitioned into two. East Germany adopted dictatorship, and the Soviet economic model, which is essentially a government-driven, or what they call as a command economy. And West Germany adopted democracy and market economy. Now, Both these parts, East and West Germany, were one country for long years, for centuries. And they were equally developed in 1945 and they were completely destroyed. They were equally destroyed. And so both countries were identical in every respect, having been part of one country. And in 1990, when the partition was undone, the Berlin Wall was broken, and Germany became one country. That is the time people found out what a difference there was between the two parts. West Germany had become a developed country, a flourishing democracy, and East Germany was pathetically poor. And even today, if you visit Germany, you will see East Germany is far behind West Germany. And there's no explanation except that dictatorships don't produce these results. You find the same thing when you compare East Germany, not with East Germany and West Germany, the same way if you compare North Korea and South Korea. Or for that matter, even with China, before economic reforms and liberalization, and after. And to some extent, even India, we adopted economic reforms in 1991. Till that time, we had a rigidly controlled Soviet model economy. And you see the difference in the economic performance. So the people made the correct choice in 1977 and chose for democracy. And ironically, when you analyze the results, you find that the more educated parts of India voted for dictatorship, and the less educated parts of India voted for democracy. That is, South India, which is considered more educated, certainly by all the indexes, it is there's a much higher rate of literacy, voted for Mrs. Gandhi's party. That means reaffirmation of the dictatorship. And it was UP, Bihar, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Punjab, Haryana. These states voted so overwhelmingly for the Janata Party, and that means democracy, that they defeated Mrs. Gandhi in her own constituency and her son in his own constituency. And every single seat, without exception, was voted for the Janata Party. And it is because of that, that despite the fact that South India didn't vote for Janata Party, the overwhelming response of North India, which is much more illiterate, much more poor than the South India, overwhelming response to favor a party which wanted democracy, tilted the scales and the Janata Party got absolute majority. So one can't even argue that it's the educated part of India which voted for democracy, whereas the masses did. There is a tradition, this hackneyed explanation we hear very often. Yeah, this urban, urban population may be this way, but what about the rural population of India, where the masses live? Well, that's an example of that. Today we have the same problem. We are faced with a new kind of problem. How to deal with corruption, how to deal with terrorism, how to deal with the threat that exists of infiltration, of social destabilization and so on. How to deal with the kinds of crimes that you are seeing today. That despite the rising education, we find crimes, particularly against women, rising to such tremendous, extreme variety. And we have to make, therefore, some choices. We are today in a very strange situation where we are the youngest population of the large countries in the world. The average age of an Indian is only 27. The average age of Chinese, because of their one child per family rigorously implemented family planning program, is 37. The average age of an American is 38. The average age of a European is 46, and that of a Japanese is 50. So we have an predominantly young population. And it is this young population which has to be motivated. And in this motivation, in what direction do we take them? In 1977, I may say that I know for a fact that the Indians living abroad, the so-called diaspora, played a major role in bringing democracy back to India. I know it firsthand because I escaped abroad and I campaigned in about 23 states of the United States. I campaigned amongst mostly the Indians, but the Americans also attended my lectures. I also went to Canada and UK. And what the Indian community did was that they publicized and exposed as hollow the propaganda that Mrs. Gandhi's government was spreading around the world, that this is a temporary measure, which nobody is in jail except criminals, smugglers, thieves, etc. And that the law and order is vastly improved. People are very happy because there's no rebellion anywhere in India. And that was exposed because the overseas Indians here, the United States and England and Canada, were able to leverage the media, which is much less than it is today, but BBC, Voice of America, which the people of India used to hear, and through that they were able to propagate what the truth was. Most people didn't know for a long time that a man like Moraji Desai, who was 80 years, was kept in solitary confinement, that Jayaprakash Narayan's lack of neglect in jail led to his kidneys failing. So all these information they got. But much more than using the media, the Indian diaspora, through their relatives back home, were able to spread by word of mouth the true facts. And so by the time the elections were declared by Mrs. Gandhi, the people already knew the truth and were able to do it. So the diaspora has demonstrated this. The diaspora demonstrated in our freedom struggle before 1947, how they organized in England and even in California here and in Vancouver, how the spirit of freedom was spread, how Subhash Chandra Bose was assisted by the Indian diaspora in Singapore and Japan and Saigon and other places. So in this context, I will make the preliminary comment that don't underestimate your influence. It's widespread, and now that we have so much media, plethora of media, particularly social media, the power of the overseas Indian is now enormous in propagating what is the truth. So it is in this context we have to make certain choices. I think it's settled, in my opinion, there is no two opinions, that if we want to economically develop, we must have democracy and market economy. Market economy does not mean laissez-faire, that is, you allow the people with capital to do what they want. Market economy is regulated, and there is an umpire, generally the government. Government is not a participant as in socialism. It's an umpire which sees that the game between the consumer and the producer is on what is called as a level playing field, or in terms of any other production activity. In our country, we've had a debate on whether Walmart should be allowed into India. Most of us, including myself, even though I'm known as a vigorous proponent of the free market or the fair market much more, nevertheless, I oppose the introduction of Walmart into India. And the reason was that Walmart has access to cheap capital in the United States. And they get capital at 2% interest rate. And if they came to India, they would be tapping into our cheap labor. And we have perhaps millions of traders, millions and millions of traders, whose access to capital is limited, and it is not less than 12% interest rate. So there cannot be an equal contest. I have no problem if Walmart would come to India and there was a competition between the Indian traditional trader and this modern corporate competitor. But it's not. It's a totally one-sided thing. And therefore all that would happen is the Indian traders would become destitute and probably have to live in, many of them would probably have to commit suicide or become workers in Walmart itself. I had suggested at one stage to the American authorities who came to see me as to find out why I was opposing it, that if the Americans who are bringing their cheap capital to India and tapping into our cheap labor would allow Indian companies to come to the United States to build roads and houses and so on, so that they can bring their cheap labor here and tap into the cheap capital of America, then I would say that it's a fair exchange. You can have Walmart come to India, as long as we can also go and you come to tap our cheap labor, we go to tap your cheap capital, if you allow that. The Americans said, no, that runs into a problem with immigration, and therefore didn't agree. So therefore, we also can't agree. I mean, so there are these kinds of choices that we have to make. But I don't think there's any doubt that the best system suited for India is a democratic market economy, which is reasonably regulated, transparently regulated. And on that there is no, we are not in a crossroads. We are in a crossroads as far as this galloping corruption we have today. And it's enormous. The amount of money that has been taken out of India and kept in foreign bank accounts, in secret accounts. In about 70 countries they permit secret accounts like Switzerland, Macau, Cayman Islands, so on. Is the amount of Indian money or Indian accounts is $1.5 trillion, and that is a little more, slightly more than our GDP. And this amount of money, if it could come back to India, would have an enormous impact on our economy. It will save the country much of the taxation that we have. Translated $1.5 trillion, if you multiply it, say, roughly by 65 rupees to a dollar, it should work out to what? 90 lakh crore rupees. 90 lakh crore rupees is a lot of money. The total tax revenue the government of India collects annually is only 4.5 lakh crores. So imagine 90 lakh crores you can get. We also, if we were to avoid corruption, if we were to auction our natural resources instead of handing them on a discretionary basis, you can generate a lot of revenue. This 2G spectrum that he mentioned arose out of the fact that the government of India parceled out to 9 companies on what they call as the first come first served basis spectrum at the price that was prevailing in 2001, in the year 2008. Now in 2001 the number of mobile sets was just 40 million. The number of mobile sets, phone sets, or cell phones, in 2008 was 700 million. So So from 40 million, it had gone up to 700 million. So you can imagine the demand for spectrum, how much would have gone. The price was therefore in 2008, 10 times the price of that prevailed in 2001. And had the government auctioned the spectrum instead of giving it on a first-come, first basis, then even that was not fairly done. There were two real estate companies which were not telecom companies, but they were close friends of some of our ministers. They found a novel way to beat the first-come, first-served system. The day it was going to be announced that whoever wants license, now please come to the office and collect it, and those who come first will get first. And 9 people were to get it. 2 of them were already sitting in the minister's room. And so they got immediate access. And they were not telecom companies. Now, if having got it so cheap, had they gone into telecom services, they could have given telecom services at a cheap rate because they got spectrum at such a cheap rate. But instead of that, all these 9 companies, either partially or totally, sold these licenses to foreign companies at 8 times the price that they got it from the government of India. So had the government of India itself auctioned the spectrum and let anybody buy, foreign company or Indian company, the government of India would have got something close to $30 billion extra revenue. And that's, it's about what is about 1,76,000 crores. So the fact is that in India, there is no shortage of resources. The question is that the government of India needs to take it out the way it should. Same thing with coal blocks. Those areas where coal was available, they were parceled out to industrialists. Had those coal blocks been auctioned, you would have got 11 lakh crores. Now all this has to be compared with the fact that the subsidy bill in the budget is only 2 lakh crores. The personal income tax that one imposes and collects, it's only 2 lakh. The total tax bill is 4.5 lakh crores. So this whole burden of taxation can be vastly reduced if we had auctioned and sold by auction these natural resources. Same thing with oil. We have some areas of India where oil is being found, such as in the Krishna Godavari region. If you had auctioned it, you would have got 24 lakh crores. We now find there's a new resource which is in big demand in the West, and that's called thorium. And India has 60% of the world's thorium, and it's available in the sand of Kerala and Tamil Nadu. So a big racket was going on of scooping the sand and selling it to US and Britain. Because by 2050, uranium will be exhausted and the world would have to shift to thorium. So that was being, if we instead of being scooped and given away at a song, if it had been auctioned, we estimate we would have got 44 lakh crores. I mean, these are mind-boggling figures, but this is the truth. So we have this question of how to end this problem of corruption. Why is there corruption? Corruption is there because the government sells or provides for the sale of a resource at well below market rates. And it becomes then important who you know. When we had the Soviet model, you could not import what you wanted, you had to get a license. To get a license, you paid money. You had to have a quota for the amount you could import. And that quota, to bypass that quota, you had to bribe the minister. So that's how really corruption started. And now it's reached a stinking level where it's permeated to to every part of our society. And it has a huge impact. It's not a question that a minister gets money and that money he becomes rich. That's not the negative aspect only of corruption. Corruption has multidimensional effects. For instance, the money that people get in corruption, a good part of it is spent on luxury goods, buying big land, big land area, building lovely houses, decorating it with the best choices, marble, air conditioning, central air conditioning, etc. Now the impact of this kind of selling, buying number of BMWs and Mercedes-Benz imported cars, Audi, etc. You see them, these more rich in India, buying, they're not satisfied with one car, they have, some of them have 30, 40 cars. I don't know how you can travel with 30, 40 cars at the same time. But anyway, what is the impact of this? The impact of this is that these industries which produce luxury or goods for luxury living, their demand for it goes up, and as a consequence the rate of return on the investment made in production of luxury goods also goes up. As a result, industrialists are becoming reluctant, more and more reluctant to produce goods which the common man wants, because the rate of return is much lower. So the investment priorities in our country has now been thoroughly distorted, because 70% of the investment is directly or indirectly being used for sustaining luxury goods. Same thing with this cash that you get in black money. You use it for forward trading in agricultural commodities. You must be getting word from your families, you must be seeing in newspapers that price of tomatoes suddenly risen, price of onions risen. These are all artificial. What happens is people with black money, they go to the wholesale market and buy these onions in big amounts, put them in cold storage, create an artificial shortage, and this shoots up the prices. And the common man is again the sufferer. There's no shortage of onions, but they are just taken off the market because of this money power. And farmers will accept money only in cash, so you can't even have income tax inspectors going around asking farmers, how did you get this money? So in this way, many aspects are there. There are also national security aspects, you see. Some of the part of the money that you earn by corruption goes into foreign bank accounts, and that is organized by the hawala operators, and they go to Dubai and sit and make them phone calls, and with their counterparts they arrange that their counterpart will do foreign exchange, and in return they will provide the rupees when somebody wants to come from that side. And the hawala operators who do this business in Dubai, they have only one problem, because Dubai is dominated by Pakistan's ISI. So they have to keep them happy, and the only thing that the ISI of Pakistan wants to know is which minister is depositing how much money in which bank account. And that becomes a power over the minister, because he gets blackmailed. If an invoice of a bank transaction appears in the front page of a newspaper, that will be the end of that minister. So if today somebody were to ask why India is so soft on Pakistan, I have a feeling that it's got something to do with this particular aspect that many of our people are blackmailed. So I'm bringing this issue to you to say that corruption is a very important, a very crucial issue on which you've got to now take a stand. And I see only 3 ways to eliminate corruption. One is, where the areas of discretion is there for civil servants, remove them. There was a time when railway reservation tickets used to be a very corrupt procedure, because you had the station master had a say, the ticket collector had a say, and so on. But then this computerization in reservation was introduced, Since then, the corruption in railway reservation is now gone to a minimum. So because the discretion was taken away. Same thing with if you want to apply for something, you want a form, you go to an office, the peon will say the boss is that the officer is asleep and is taking his afternoon siesta, and you have to give him some money to wake him up, and then money to the civil servant to listen to you. But now you can get it downloaded and printed in your house through the computer, the internet. So this e-governance system has also reduced it. But I think we now have to make take a stand as to what the source of this corruption is. Corruption comes out of greed. I had a student when I was teaching at IIT Delhi, Professor Economics at IIT, called Rajat Gupta, and I hear now he's in jail here, and got caught in insider trading. So I made inquiries from his family members, and I found that the only reason he did this foolish thing of, he had amassed a huge amount of money, he had occupied very high positions, is that he suddenly developed greed to become the richest Indian in the United States. And he got every corner and got caught. I think if you look around the world or look around India, you find that today the corruption has become a in thing, because this is the fastest passport to social status. I was not so in India. So we have today one major dilemma, or what you call as crossroads, as to how much should you propose a society develop on basis of pure materialistic prosperity. Has it produced happiness elsewhere? When I go to the ashrams of Shri Ravi Shankar and Swamy Dayanand Saraswati and people like that, I find a large number of foreigners there, and mostly Americans, very rich people. And I ask them, what brings them here? And they say that it's a search of happiness. Now, all of them are so well-to-do, but they don't seem to be happy. And they somehow feel that they can learn how to be happy while meeting Indian sadhus. And this is very extraordinary. In fact, there was a Hollywood actress, I don't know if you people have heard her name, Julia Roberts, who came to India in search of happiness. And she found the happiness and she converted to Hinduism. You find now people taking to meditation. And I found recently that some corporations in America are teaching some verses of Bhagavad Gita, because that is the best way to release you from stress. Stress comes because of certain things. For example, your attachment to the goal, whereas Bhagavad Gita teaches you that the only freedom you have is freedom of action. You're doing your best, but the rewards are not in proportion, not a straight line relationship to an effort. So I think we, in our traditional culture, putting some of Hindus, Sanatana Dharma, we never ever made money as a determinant of social status. And this was brought vividly to my attention once when I was first came to Harvard as a student. And my classmate asked me if I could explain why Indians followed Mahatma Gandhi. And I asked him, why you asked this question? He said, because Mahatma Gandhi was not properly dressed. How could you follow a man who is not properly dressed? Now, it's a fact that in the United States, if you want to be a good politician, you have to be dressed very well. You must have a very nice tie and very excellent suit and shoes. Now, and even the religious leaders in the West, take the Pope, for example, he's extremely well dressed, whereas our topmost religious leaders would just be having a plain bangwa to wrap himself. So there is something there, and when you start looking, a society was always structured on venerating the most is the learning and sacrifice. And money was, was not looked down upon, making money or pursuing money or material prosperity. But it was not a guarantee for social status. So I think somewhere we have to make up our mind. This westernization that is going on in India, whether it should be moderated with our traditional values. And young people are today in search of these answers. And I think we need to do it because we will certainly, maybe temporarily, we have an economic setback, but India is going to grow very fast in the future. And here I think we need to resolve this issue. And in resolution of this issue, there are other aspects also. The question of our identity. What is India? What does it mean to be an Indian? And I ask college students wherever I go, tell me what do you understand by the term Indian? And invariably it boils down to that I have an Indian passport. Now, that is not sufficient. That's not your identity. If you say my identity is the civilization of India, then the question will become that the civilization of India is predominantly Hindu. What about Muslims? What about Christians? How are they adjusted as Indians? If you see civilization. Because the Muslim and Christians, their authority is not located in India. It's located abroad, being religions which came from abroad. Whereas Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, Jainism, they are religions which were born in India, and all the religious authorities are in India. So we have to resolve this question, because there is a question of perception. Muslim community in India, by and large, are against, to give you an example only, are against India having good relations with Israel. But Israel is a country which has helped India a lot. We have no conflicts with Israel. We don't have a common border. And we have a very historical tradition of good relations with the Jews. And why should the Muslim object? You talk to any Muslim intellectual, he is against Israel. And it turns out because of Israel's treatment of Palestinians and what it does to the Islamic neighbors. Now, we can't judge on moral grounds the policies of other governments, because then there's no limit. What the Americans do, if we decide to morally look at it, maybe we won't have good relations with America either. We have to look at national interests. So what is expected is that the Muslim community would not regard Israel in terms of how the international community of Islam looks at Israel, but more as to what the Indian national interest. There's not only a problem with the Muslims. Take, for example, the Tamils. A small section, although the media likes to portray it as if it's the entire Tamil population. I myself a Tamil and don't subscribe to this view. They have taken stringent, strident positions on Sri Lanka. And this has affected our national interests. For example, the Sri Lankan government asked India to help them build a port near Colombo on the western coastline of Sri Lanka, called Hamantota. And they said that whatever money you spend, you please treat it as a loan to us, as credit, which we will repay. But the Manmohan Singh government could not do it because the then constituent, the DMK, they said, no, you cannot help them because what has happened to the Tamils there. Of course, the Tamil, there nothing happened except that there was a terrorist movement there led by the LTT, and There was a big bitter war, and in the war there were lots of collateral damages. And but the DMK was identified with the SDT, and so they made an issue that they would topple the government if government of India had Sri Lanka. So we excused ourselves, and immediately the Chinese moved in and said, why you want to go to India? And why do you want a loan from India? We'll give you grant, we'll give you free. And they have built now a beautiful port in Sri Lanka. And the Chinese have got a little place to place their own navy next to it. Now that's affected our national interests. And sometimes this happens with Bangladesh too, Mamata Banerjee making a big issue about it. So I think we need to define our identity in such a clear way that we will regard ourselves as Indians first, and then only after that Muslim or Hindu or Bengali or Tamil. Now this is an unresolved question, I regret to say, because of the failure of Jawaharlal Nehru to protect the correct history of India to be written. And this correct history of India has yet to be written. There is, I think, not connected with you, but I think tomorrow we have Mr. Rajiv Malhotra in one of the sessions. We've done a lot of work on this. Now, the British wanted to divide India, so they cooked up this whole story about Aryans and Dravidians. Now DNA studies show that there is no such thing as Aryan and no such thing as Dravidian. All Indians are the same DNA. And by all Indians, I mean wherever you have seen any ethnic question raised. For example, in Bombay, Raj Thakre raised the question of how the Bihari taxi driver was different from the Marathi. And I managed to get a hair sample, because you can test DNA by hair sample of Mr. Raj Thakre and a Bihari taxi driver. And I found that they had the same DNA. The Hindus and Muslims also have the same DNA. That means that all Muslims are actually have the same DNA as a Hindu, which only means one thing, that they are people whose ancestors were Hindus. Otherwise you can't explain how Muslims and Christians, Christians of course don't object to it, Muslims and Hindus have the same DNA. Brahmins and scheduled castes have the same DNA. And that can be explained by the fact that the Varna system was never birth-based. You have to just read the Bhagavad Gita. Or you have to go and see the examples. Veda Vyasa was a Maharishi, but he was not born in a Brahmin family. His mother was a fisherwoman. And so was Kalidasa. He was in the forest. He was a Adivasi. And then Valmiki, he was born of Dalit parents. Vishwamitra was a Kshatriya. So, I mean, this, if you want an example of a Brahmin, then you will have to accept that you will have to take the example of Ravan. Ravan was a Brahmin. And for a long time, Karnanidhi did not know that. And he worshipped Ravan as a Dravidian king and celebrated Ravan Leela when North India celebrated Ram Leela. So, the British had built this whole concoction of Aryan, Dravidian, and so on. And this is thoroughly divided our mindset. And therefore, this is one of the major issues when it comes up, because terrorism is having an effect and is now reaching a situation where Indians may have to fight Indians. And to that, therefore, we need a theory by which you can unite the Indians the length and breadth of India. So the question of identity is of very great importance. Now, finally, I would say that what this country, what India needs today for this modern state is a large number of very able politicians who could be in other professions. I mean, you take the case of Obama here, he could have been a top-class lawyer. He's got a degree from Harvard in law, and he was top of the class, and he could have been a top corporate lawyer. Even Bush, whom many people used to make fun of, he had an MBA from Harvard. Now in India, it's very difficult to find people educated. For a long time, I was the only PhD in Parliament. And so, you have had some politicians who have claimed high degrees, but then later on it was found that they never went to college. The classic case is that of Ms. Sonia Gandhi, who claimed that she had a degree in English from the University of Cambridge. Till I had gone to give a lecture in Cambridge and I found out there was no such student. And it caused a lot of embarrassment for her. But of course later on she said it was a typing mistake, which put that in. If that was so, it's the longest typing mistake in history. So anyway, I'm only saying that we need now a new kind of politician in India. And that new kind of politician can only come if we have a place to train them. We now need a institution which trains politicians. There are a lot of young people who now, particularly one new thing I've seen in India is a lot of young people want to join politics, but they don't know how. They don't know how they're going to support themselves. They don't know how to get the entry point. And for so long, politics was neglected. It's considered as infra-dig. There are all kinds of people have got into politics. And they are making sure that no one talented comes in because they know that they're going to be relevant. So one of the things that needs to be done is this. So if I were to conclude by saying what can the diaspora do, I would say one of the things that you can do is contribute to transforming the Indian economy to a high growth path by bringing together your advanced knowledge, which you can easily acquire here, on solving key problems. We need position papers to be produced so that any political party which is now, for instance, the BJP now has to, I'm part of a committee called the Vision Document, and we are examining that supposing we want to solve the drinking water problem, what should we be doing? Supposing we want to solve this problem of India having rivers which go and flood the large areas, and there are rivers which have no water. For instance, Vaigai in South India and Kaveri, they don't have any water. Whereas Godavari and Krishna, just 95% of the water flows into the ocean. So what is the system by which you can you create a water grid? And so if you can get a water grid, how do you do it? We are so thoroughly dependent on Arab oil for our fuel energy. Can we look up the substitute? Well, yes, there is a substitute called hydrogen fuel cells, but the Americans are not interested in it because for the Americans, they have so much abundance of oil and they have stocked so much. I think even from one of the plus points of their occupation of Iraq is that they've accumulated a huge stock of oil. So they're not interested in that research, but we can. Power systems fueled by nuclear reactors through thorium. There again we have to make a certain scientific claim. These are some of the things where you people here are well placed. On corruption, you can play a big role. I have said this to other places also. I'm saying it to you again, that if we can catch a few politicians, big names, it'll have a very salutary effect on corruption in general. So I would like to see, because some of these politicians have had connections with the United States, and we'd like to know. I've told people that Rahul Gandhi studied in a college in Winter Park near Orlando, Florida, a college called Rollins College. And I know for a fact that he paid his tuition fees by a check on Bank of America of Cayman Island. And if somebody in the diaspora has the time to get this out of the Rollins College, not an easy task, and then that will be the end of him. Also told that he declared himself as an Italian citizen in that college. Because it's a Christian college, so you have to claim Christian lineage to get in. There are a lot of Indian politicians who have property here. We like to know that. And that's not difficult to get. So I don't know whether you would be interested, since you are all busy, but if you really want to contribute to India, you are coming there and trudging the fields of India for electioneering is not so important in terms of your capacities. Your capacity is intellectual. And of course, you have one great way of influencing elections. You have relatives back home, you can influence them. Or you could all pull together. You see, one of the big things about American education system compared to India, the American top universities are all donated and funded and driven by the alumni. Harvard is run entirely by the alumni. There's no government involvement at all. Whereas in India, we depend on the government to start an education institution. So the same way, if you decide to create an institution in India which develops and trains and